We are a women's basketball school again. This is Locked On Baylor.
You are Locked On Baylor, your daily podcast on the Baylor Bears, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Locked On Baylor, brought to you by FanDuel. I am your host, Cam Stewart of ESPN Central Texas. Thank you for making it your first listen today and every day. As you can see, I'm back in the studio, back from Memphis, just back from Memphis. Very tired, if you can see on YouTube. I basically was just in the car for 10 and a half straight hours. But excited to talk to you guys. I've actually been thinking about what I'm going to talk about today this whole time. And of course, I have to start with the ladies and that just thrilling, exciting win back on Sunday night. It's still like coursing through my veins. That has been the silver lining of the men's team losing, was just how exciting the women made it on Sunday night, and they are still playing ball deep into March, and love that for them. We are going to talk about the men again. And more building off a point that I made in yesterday's show about the team building and what it looks like championship teams in college basketball look like, and how Baylor can fit back into that mold, because they've kind of strayed away from it. But there are two sides to every story, and we're going to go over both sides of that. But starting with the women, they go into Blacksburg, into the castle, and they take the crown, Virginia Tech, and advance to the Sweet 16. And I know there are people who will be saying, well, they didn't have Kitley. They didn't have Kitley. But they were also, on paper, a much better team than Baylor. And I get it. Not having Kitley out there, that absolutely changes the game. But if you're Baylor, you cannot take that excuse. And Nicki Collen didn't. She said that in her media availability on Saturday. She said, we can't just sit here and say, oh, well, they don't have Kitley, so what are we supposed to do? Not go out there and take advantage of it? And they did. And credit to Virginia Tech. I mean, we knew that was a good team surrounding Kitley, no doubt. And they played a good game on Sunday night. But Baylor got the smash and grab, run out of Blacksburg with a victory, and head on up the West Coast to Portland to play this Sweet 16 game. And we'll talk about the opponent later in the week, but for right now, we're focusing on Baylor. And what an exciting win that was. And it was really so important that they showed in the closing minutes that they can close out a tight game, because that's something they've struggled with all year. I think that's a very fair criticism of them. They've struggled. I look back at that, that Iowa State game in the Big 12 tournament. I look at the Iowa State game in Ames. I look at the Kansas State game in Waco, and there were a couple others that you could look at. The Texas game in Waco for sure, and that they came out on the wrong end of closing those things out. And it's something that Nicki Collen has talked about throughout the year, and it was something you could see in the game, watching it on TV, was that it was player led. It was the players that went out there and did that. And here's what Nicki Collen had to say about that specifically.
It just feels good to celebrate with that group of girls. Like, we started this journey, in July, really summer school, but when we went overseas and played, and it was all about building camaraderie to get to this point, to win these close games. And, when Georgia's shot banked in, when you play great defense and it banks in, you're like, no, that's not fair. It's really not fair. But I thought we did a good job, and I thought in particular, I didn't make a lot of play calls. I mean, it should have been obvious. Like, we were going to get Sarah and we were going to get Jada in ball screens and make them guard us in ball screens. And, we felt like we could really attack, in particular, their fives in ball screens. And I thought we did a good job of that, picking up some fouls on Strack. But I thought we stayed composed.
She says it was the players out there. She said she wasn't even calling plays. And that is not a bad thing. That is not a bad mark on a coach. You need, it's a player's game, right? as much as the influence that coaches have on the college game versus the pro game, whether it's the men's or the women's sport, it is about the players. And credit to Nicki Collen for trusting this team. She says, we have been in those trenches. We have been in those battles all season long. I didn't need to call out the plays because this is a player-driven team, and they recognized how they could take down this team. And not only did they recognize it, but they executed it, which has been a problem this year. But it was not a problem against Virginia Tech, handing the Hokies their first loss in their arena this season. Have I mentioned that before? Did I mention that yesterday? That Virginia Tech is now 16-1 in their home arena because they hadn't faced the Baylor Bears yet. And they hadn't faced Jada Walker. And boy, I talked about Jada in yesterday's show, but I didn't talk about her enough. I mean, the coaching staff was out there saying, Jada Walker, Jada Walker. Yes, Jada Walker. She was incredible in this game. How many players have we talked about this year of, I'm a big Dariana Littlepage-Buggs fan, or Dre Edwards needs to go out there and be your best player. Oh, and Sarah Andrews is on these watch lists, and she struggled a little bit, and that's why the team dipped a little bit. And, oh, look how Jana Van Geitenbeek stepped up throughout the year. All those things are true. But we didn't talk a lot about Jada Walker. And yet she has had some fantastic games in big moments this year. I think of that first Texas game when Baylor won and they led wire to wire. Jada Walker was the star of that game. I think she had 19 or 21 or something like that. She had a brilliant game. And she kind of won upset in this game against Virginia Tech. When all the chips are out there on the table and they're playing on the road, all Jada Walker does is go for 28 points on 9 of 16 from the floor, add a trio of assists in there, and go 9 of 10 from the free throw line. She stepped up. That's a March Madness hero right there. When the lights were brightest, Jada Walker played her absolute best. And I want to include this as well because I love what Nicki Collen had to say after the performance from her point guard, Jada Walker.
For Jada, when you looked at when we were 14-0 and you compared that to when we were 10-7, and some of it's level of competition, but included in that was Utah and Texas and Miami and a lot of really good teams. And so, she'd gotten really frustrated with her inability to make open threes. We just told her, take your jump shot. Your jump shot's a layup. Your jump shot's a layup. Mix in, playing off the bounce, getting to 15 feet. And so she's just had really good practices dialed into getting to her jump shot. And so I just thought when she made one, then it was two. And, it just, they kept backing up on her because she's so slippery. If you come up on her, she's going to cross you up and get to the rim. So I thought she did an unbelievable job playing against an All-American point guard.
And yeah, what a performance she got from both of her point guards. Because by the way, Sarah Andrews, who we didn't really talk about, 16 points with 3 assists and 3 rebounds. That's a positive stat line for her. Who's still working back into some form. But it really goes back to that mentality of whether it's you, whether it's me, it's always we. Is that what it is? I think that's us. I think that's what they say. But it's all about a new hero stepping up every night, depending on what that is. Bella Fauntleroy has the massive game in the first round, and then she goes to the bracket and puts Baylor past Virginia Tech, and she was clairvoyant. She got it right. She only has 9 points in this one, 9 points and 9 rebounds. So that's a pretty damn good game, but it's Jada Walker who has the big scoring night. She has 28. I look at Dre Edwards, who did not play a lot in this game, 7 points. Asia Blackwell, 1 point, didn't hit a field goal, but she also gives you 8 rebounds, gave you some key offensive boards late in the game. And if it's not her, it's Sarah Andrews as that second scorer. Or Jana Van Geitenbeek, who has double figures in the first matchup. She only has 2 in this one. But Dariana Littlepage-Buggs goes 5 of 7 from the floor. So it is a true team effort. And when Baylor is rolling, it is because of a team, not because of a player. And yes, Jada Walker was the leader in this game. But it was everyone that contributed. And if it's whether it's you, whether it's me, it's always we. So it was Bella Fauntleroy. And then it was Jada Walker. And that's 2 wins for Baylor. And long may it continue, I say. But first, I got to tell you that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the NCAA tournament. So whether you're betting on that big upset, of which there have been a few, or a 1 seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win the whole thing. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon, and you can bet on the college hoops until they cut down the nets at the end of the Final Four. Again, that's FanDuel.com/lockedon. How about this? Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home that winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to that peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, LED headlights, exhaust kits. I've got a car that needs some fixing. I am going to eBay Motors. It's in my driveway right now, and all I'm thinking about is eBay Motors. Because with them, you're burning rubber, you're not burning cash. And to prove that, they have over 122 million parts for your #1 ride or die. So you're going to find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. So with all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only and exclusions do apply. And that eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to our USA customers. So I talked about the thrill of victory with the women, the agony of defeat with the men going out in the second round for the 3rd year in a row. And there's still so many elements that we can attack on this Baylor men's season, on this Baylor men's loss in the tournament, and where they go going forward. But I think what's one that's been really intriguing, and it was one of my first thoughts after the game the other night, and it's one that's been I've seen a lot on social media and people responding to the video, is that Baylor cannot win with one and dones. I think it's an interesting point. And I started to think about it. I thought about it a lot on the drive home from Memphis, as a matter of fact. And let me start by saying this. I say Baylor should have a new team building approach. By no means is that saying Scott Drew is not a good coach. No, that's not true. Okay. He's a very good coach. He's a Hall of Fame coach. And I trust him with building a team a new way, which he's done before to great effect. Okay. So that's the first one. And then the second one is when I'm looking at the one and dones and how that fits into the team. Let me start by saying this. There, by no means is that an indictment on Jacoby Walter. It's not an indictment on Yves Missi. It's not an indictment on Jeremy Sohan. It's not an indictment on Keontae George or Kendall Brown. None of that. I'm not saying those players can't help you win a championship. Not what I'm saying. But I think it's an interesting point to think of how Baylor has shifted towards one and dones being in very important roles for the team since the national championship victory. I mean, each of the last 3 years, they have had at least one starter being a one and done freshman. It was Kendall Brown in 22, and obviously Sohan was the 6th man of the year, the lottery pick. Keontae George last year, and you had 2 this year, and Walter and Missi. Okay? But I think there is validity to the point that college basketball is not in that mode anymore where you can have 2 or 3 supremely talented freshmen in your starting lineup and go and win a national championship. In fact, that era is over. It's been over for a while. To me, there's only been 2 teams in college basketball that have truly embraced it like the one and done teams. Teams that have 2 or 3 guys in their starting lineup and that are their key players, are their engines, and win a championship. Those 2 teams that played the one and done ball and won the national championship were 2012 Kentucky and 2015 Duke. So the last one was almost 10 years ago. 2012 Kentucky, they had Anthony Davis, They had Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, the first 2 picks in the draft, and a couple of other guys too that were highly recruited, 5-star freshmen, and one went on to become an NBA superstar. 2015, Duke starting lineup had Jahlil Okafor, Justice Winslow, and Final Four MOP Tyus Jones, 3 freshmen in there. And those teams were able to overwhelm with talent. Now, I would again look at the Duke team and say, well, the other 2 starters were seniors who had played well over 100 games for Duke before going into that season. That was Emile Jefferson and Quinn Cook. So there is the need for senior leadership in there as well. But we have surpassed the one and done era in college basketball. To me, that was about 2010 to maybe 15 or 16. And, 2010, Kentucky was the big team most of the year, right? John Wall and DeMarcus Cousins. Well, they lost in the Elite 8. They lost to a West Virginia team that had a bunch of seniors like Joe Mazzulla and Deshaun Butler. And that team lost to Duke that won the national championship. You might remember it because they beat Baylor. That had 3 seniors and 2 juniors starting. So, okay, that's not it. The next year it's UConn, right? And they had a junior in Kemba Walker, a senior in Alex Oriaki. They didn't have a one-and-done guy. 2012, it's Kentucky. And they beat a team with another one-and-done in Thomas Robinson. So there you go. There's one. 2013, Louisville, although if you look at the record books, it's nobody, was not a one-and-done team. They had a bunch of juniors and seniors on that team. Okay, 2014, who won it that year? UConn. All kinds of juniors and seniors, including Shabazz Napier, of course, that beat another one of those one-and-done Kentucky teams in the Final Four. 2015, you had 2 powerhouses the whole year. It was Kentucky with Karl Anthony Towns, and it was Duke. And Wisconsin with senior Frank Kaminsky beat Kentucky, lost to Duke. And since then, there has not been a one-and-done team that has won a national championship. In fact, there's really only been one team that I can think of that's had any one-and-dones that won the national championship. And that was the kid from Carolina. I'm forgetting his name right now. He was the center in 2017, and it was Tony Bradley. Tony Bradley was his name. 2017 Carolina had Tony Bradley, who did not start for them and went late in the first round of the NBA draft. But if you think of that Carolina team, you are not thinking of Tony Bradley. I guarantee it. You're thinking of like Justin Jackson and those guys. And Bryce Johnson, is that it? Something like that. So all that to say, the teams that have won national championships in the last decade are not dependent on one-and-done guys. And if you look at that Baylor 2021 team, that is absolutely the case. Okay? They did not have a single one-and-done. And in fact, if I'm remembering correctly, they did not have a single freshman that was a real contributor to that team. LJ Cryer was on the bench. He was a reserve. He was not part of the real rotation yet. But you look at like Jonathan Chachua was in his first year, but he wasn't a freshman. Matthew Meyer was a sophomore, or a junior. So they did not have a one and done guy. They didn't have freshmen leading the way. And this is what I mean by kind of the fine margins of how we judge a season. Because Jacoby Walter and Yves Missi were fantastic for this team this year. And I wouldn't trade either one of them for most guys in the country. But it's not about them so much as it is the entire team. I look at the teams that are still in it. UConn and Houston, the 2 front runners. And for me, Houston is my national champion pick. Those guys have played together for years. I get LJ Cryer just came into Houston, but that's a guy who's played on a national championship team, comes in and is kind of the missing piece. But the rest of those guys, they played for years, man. Juwan Roberts and Jamal Shedd and this whole UConn team, basically, they've played together. And that is what is winning in college basketball again. We had a very short stint where one and dones were what got you to the Final Four or won you a national championship. That's not there anymore. And it's not on any one guy, but it sure is valid enough that you need to rethink how we are building this team. Because for the third time in 4 years, Baylor is going to need to replace 4 starters, most likely. 4 starters. And that is just as good as your coaching can be. And it is really good here at Baylor, not just Scott, but all the way on down. And as good as your culture is, and as good as the guys you bring in from the portal, that is not a recipe for success. It's about bringing guys in and having great senior leadership and having them play together. For me, that is what wins you games. That's what gets you to the Final Four. And that's what keeps us from having tough episodes like we had the last couple of days, personally. All right, it's that time of the episode again, y'all. We are looking at this week's March Madness bracket highlight. It's brought to you by our friends at Nissan. And each week we're picking one team that stands out, a team that has pushed it further than the rest, just like any of the all-new 2024 Nissan SUVs. These guys or gals were able to take it to the next level. And I've already let you in on this, but I can't help but say it again. The Baylor Lady Bears are this week's Nissan Rogue. Okay, they shocked the world. They went into Virginia Tech in Blacksburg and took the Hokies right out. They were the lower seed, did not matter. They are going up to Portland. They have used that team-first attitude that have pushed them onto another adventure. Okay, that's what I call going rogue as a team, and that's exactly what the Lady Bears have done. So take the Nissan Rogue, take the Nissan Pathfinder or the Nissan Armada, and go and find your next big adventure. And you're going to do it driving up to Portland. I know you're going to do it. So find a Nissan. And the way you're going to do it, that is at shopnissanusa.com. So I said it was a double-edged sword for the one and dones. Okay, it is. It's easy for me to sit here and say, well, you got to stop doing it. You got to have these veterans in here. It's easy for me to say that. But then you might say, Cam, okay, fine. Look at it next year. Jason Asamoah, Robert Wright, VJ Edgecombe. Which one do you not want? I want all of them. I want all of them. I want the best high school players in the country to come play at Baylor. That's where it's tough. Because what do you want Scott Drew to do? Do you want him to not recruit the top-end talent in America? Because in a way, that's what you want. That's what I just described. And so it comes at actually the most coincidental time, because Baylor's about to bring in maybe their most talented freshman class ever in terms of high schoolers' talent right now. They missed out on Trey Johnson, but they got VJ Edgecombe, Jason Asamoah, Robert Wright. Those are 3 top-end 4 or 5-star guys. Edgecombe is one of the top 5 players in all of the country. So I don't know how that starts. I don't know how you start and make that shift into, okay, we're done with bringing in some of the best talent in America. We want to build a team like how we used to. As much as I want that, or we want that, it's just not that easy. I would love to see, and this is what I thought we were building towards the last couple of years. I would love to see a mix where you bring in some top-end guys that are freshmen, but you have experienced, terrific basketball players. And I think the last time we saw that was 2022. That seemed like the perfect mix. And look, I could do a whole episode on how that team just got too snake bitten because they could have been a Final Four team. But you're coming off a national championship and you lose 4 starters, but you bring in, you have Flo Thamba, who was the starter from the year before. You have Matthew Meyer, who was such an impact player off the bench. You have an Adam Flagler, who's such an impact player off the bench. You have an LJ Cryer, who became a huge impact player off the bench. And then you bring in James Akinjo, a guy who's been around the block, played at 2 major programs, and was an all-conference player at Arizona. He was a senior. played a lot of games. And then you bring in 2 freshmen, one of which was, I mean, it's easy for us to look at them as studs now, but Jeremy Sohan was completely unheralded when he came in. Kendall Brown was the stud freshman. And so through bringing in those 2 guys, one of which was a lottery pick, only one of them was starting. You had 2 other guys in there who were major parts of your championship team. And then you've got a point guard who comes in as an all-conference player who's already played 80 to 90, 100 games in college basketball. So that was the closest we came to having a hybrid of both of those things. And then this year you can say that too, right? I mean, you had leadership in Jalen Bridges, a guy who had been around the block, absolutely. Ray J. Dennis, who had played a lot of games but was new to the team. Jaden Nunn, same thing. But and as much as I like this team, we all did. And I feel bad even talking about, this way about them because I do respect them, but it didn't get the job done. I can't sugarcoat that. Second round is not getting the job done. So I would love to see Baylor go back to the team building that they had before because I think, that works really well with the culture that you have. And B, it's what wins championships in college basketball now. And that's the end all be all. Because I think this coaching staff and the culture they have built at Baylor is just a much better fit for guys who play together for 2 or 3 seasons. But then you got to say goodbye to some talent. So we'll see, because I think Scott Drew and his coaching staff are going to take a long, hard look at this offseason. I do, because they do that every year. And I think we will see some changes in the next couple of years and how they build that team. And Scott Drew ain't going anywhere. And I am thankful for that. It was not a good game. I thought he got out coached on Sunday. But I trust in him and I trust in his staff. Let me know if you trust in him and trust in his staff. Do that down in the comments below. Let me know what you think about this team building and what Baylor needs to do and how we can correct course and get back past the first weekend. And let me know what you think about those Lady Bears. I am so excited to see them up in Portland and back in the Sweet 16. For those of us who have been watching the Lady Bears for more than just the last couple of years, this is where they belong, right? They deserve to keep playing games and deep into March. And even if it's not a victory in the Sweet 16, this is invaluable experience for them and for Nicki Collen, who deserves to be here. And I'm glad that she is. And this is a crucial point in a crucial accomplishment, I should say, in her early years here at Baylor. Anyway, drop that down in the comments below. Be sure to like and subscribe. Tell your friends. We'll be back tomorrow with your favorite show. And thank you for making it your first listen today and every day. We'll be back with what we like to call Locked On Baylor.